So this lesson is for 6.3, which is on midpoint formula. Yesterday we saw distance formula, and the day before that you saw slope formula. So there's a lot of formulas that we cover in this unit with regards to algebra. And so today we're going to see what is this midpoint formula, kind of going to discover it. So we have a table, and it shows us the endpoints of a bunch of segments. Those segments themselves are on this graph. I know it's hard to see the letters. Some of them didn't print the greatest, so we'll go through a couple of these, or maybe as many as we can, to get the idea of what happens exactly. How are we going to kind of find this midpoint formula if you haven't seen it before? So the first point we're going to work with, the two endpoints are A and B. So here's A. It's sitting at -8, +4, which is labeled. Same with B. It's labeled at -3, 7, like it is. And so it's just saying, basically, if you were to look at these 2 points and try to get exactly in the middle, like what point would be exactly in the middle of those? Now this first one's a little bit tough because it starts with, like, in order to get halfway, you're going to actually be at, like, not on the actual crosshairs of a box. So when I look at it, and I try to go exactly to the middle, it looks like it's going to be at this point because you're going the same distance away to get there. So this point right here, which is then the midpoint, is at -5.5, +5.5. So that's what I want to write here as my discovery. This is without any formula so far. It's just looking at a graph and saying, where is the middle of it? Where is the middle of that segment? Do the same thing for another one, B to Q, right here. This is Q, this is P, and again, the coordinates are right here. Going halfway between this one, looks like it's right here. This time, you are still going to the halfway mark between like -7 and -8, which would be -7.5, but this time you're sitting up at 1. So -7.5 and a +1 is what we're seeing so far. Then we have the next one. It says R to S. So R is 3, 4 right up here. And S is 7, 4. So it's just a horizontal line like this. And halfway looks pretty easy to find, which is 5, 4. And we're going to keep going. G to H. Halfway looks like right here, which again is going to get kind of in the middle of going down. So this looks like 2, -0.5, and it is a 0 in front of the decimal. Okay, we keep going. M to N. Here's M. Here's N. Halfway looks like here. And if you're unsure about exactly halfway, the whole point of why we're going to eventually have a formula so that you don't have to kind of make these approximations, but anytime you do approximate it, make sure you're checking, like, how do I get there? Is it the same distance to get from here to here as it is to the midpoint to the other endpoint? So yes, it's the same. It's like going up 3 and left 3. Then you go up 3 and left 3 again, and you know you found the middle. So this is -1, -5. And we're going to keep going. C to D. We do get more decimals on this one. So halfway looks like this point here, which is at -3.5 and a -3.5. And you might say, well, why are we doing this over and over again? Don't we get the gist of it? We could stop here. The goal is to be able to look at the coordinates to see if we can identify some kind of a formula. So we'll do that next after just a few more of these. So the next one for K to L. K is right here. I know it's hard to see. And L is down here. It's this like vertical line right here at -6, -6, and then at -6, -9. This time the midpoint would be halfway again at -6, -7.5. And then we have one more that actually is shown on this graph, which is V to U, which is here. There's V, there's U. Halfway again is going to be a decimal. So it's 7.5 and a -5.5. Okay, now these last two don't actually fit on the graph. They're just saying, hypothetically, if we had these 2 points that are clearly much larger, they don't even fit really nicely in this graph, what would its midpoint be? So we're going to come back to this. When we get to like numbers, we're going to answer these questions in a second. And then eventually we're going to get a generic way of writing it with these coordinates, x1, y1, x2, y2, similar to what we did with slope and distance formula. We'll have a midpoint formula that looks like with x's and y's. Okay, so first it said, for number 1, we just did this, find the coordinates of each midpoint of each segment and then list them in the table. We did that. Second question says, what patterns do we see when you look at the endpoints and their midpoint? So this would be easier to kind of do like a discussion, try to see what's happening, but let's just go ahead and see what we can notice. So if you're looking at the x values, you have a -8, a -3, and you're getting to -5.5. That one's harder to see because of the decimals. I'm going to jump to the one that doesn't have decimals right here. So it's 3 and a 7, and you're getting to 5. A 4 and a 4, and you're getting to 4. That the goal is to try to see, like, well, how does that work? Am I, like, adding the numbers for the coordinates? Am I subtracting them? What am I doing? And you can have more than one operation at a time. So the easiest way to me is looking at 3 and 7. Is there some way that you can either add or subtract them to try to get to 5? And no, there's not. If you subtract 7 and 3, you'd get 4. If you add them, you get 10, and that's something you want to consider because half of 10 is 5. And so that's kind of the first thought that probably hopefully comes to mind is, what if you add them and then you divide by 2? And then you check it for as many of them as you can to see if it works. It'll be easier to do it with the ones that are not decimals first. So if I jump down to this one and do -4 plus 2 is a -2, and when I divide that by 2, I also get -1. -2 adding to -8 is a -10. When I divide by 2, I do get -5. So this is what I'm going to write in words. I'm going to write, you're adding the x values, or the x's, for the coordinates, and you're dividing by 2. And then same thing for the y's. You add the y values, and divide by 2. Because remember, if you're trying to get to the middle of something, a midpoint, that means you're going to divide by 2 to get to like halfway. And finally, and that's kind of what we saw happening on all of these, you can double check the pattern now that we've kind of written it down. You can check it for every single one of these, and it is going to hold true for every single one of these midpoints. So now if I look at, it says use the pattern that you just determined to find the midpoint for a segment whose endpoints are 400, 35 and -30, 50. So this time, add your x's. So we would do like the 400 plus a -30. That would give me a 370. And when you divide that by 2, you get 185. Okay, so there's the x value. I'll write in 185. Do the same thing for the y's. We have 35 and 50. You're always adding them up. So this comes out to 85, and dividing it by 2 gets you to 42.5. Okay, so we just found the y value as well. And when you write a midpoint, we don't just leave our answer like this. When we write midpoints, we write ordered pairs. So you want to write the x value and then the y value. It's good to label with a letter. So I chose the letter M for midpoint, though you could pick a different letter. Okay, so now to get to this midpoint formula, now that we've kind of said it in words, we've seen it with examples, here is the generic formula. It says x1, y1, x2, y2. So the formula, I'm going to write it kind of tiny at first up here, and then I'll write it much bigger at the bottom. So it says x1 plus x2, and then one big division bar with the 2 at the denominator. And this will say y1 plus y2, and then divided by 2. So kind of hard to see there, but that's just what the actual formula is, which I will write much bigger down here where it says, here's the midpoint formula using x1, y1, x2, y2. Okay, so let me move this down and write out using any two coordinates. Anytime you have a segment and you're trying to get to the middle of it, no matter where that segment is or how that segment is drawn, you can always find its midpoint. Now, you cannot find the midpoint of a line because lines go on forever, or array, but you can find them for actual segments. And you can label them. I could call this M, and so when I write the formula, it looks like this. Now, formulas sometimes have equal signs. This does not have any equal signs because it is just saying what to do with the x values and what to do with the y values. And it's an actual coordinate. That's different than what you saw with distance formula and midpoint or slope formula. Those have equal signs because you're solving an actual equation and saying what's happening to the distance, what's happening to the slope. Here, we're just going to leave our answer like this, with parentheses, a comma between the two numbers, and it's better to label it with a letter just telling you this is my midpoint. Okay, so just to practice now on the next page, usually with practices, you guys know you don't have to do all of it, but you can try as much of it that you'd like to. Of course, the answer key is posted on this practice also in Canvas, so always feel free to double check anything that you try out. I'm going to just do two of them with you guys, just like I usually do, kind of picking a few, and then you can either get started on homework or you can work on this practice first and then get started on homework. Either way, you should have plenty of time to finish up that 6.3 homework. For the first one that I want to go over, just number 1, it does say to find the slope and the length of the segment also, but I'm going to just do the midpoint part because that's the newer part. Hopefully you can practice what's the slope and what's the distance or the length using the distance formula. Let's just do midpoint here, the new part that we just saw today. So just use your 2 coordinates for the segment, M and N. It's 14 and -9 for the first one. So 14 plus a -9 divided by 2, and 7 plus 1 divided by 2. And then we just write our final answer as a coordinate. You don't have any equal signs. If it's a fraction, it's better to leave it as a fraction, but you can write a decimal also. If you're going to use your calculator for this, make sure you either use parentheses around the numerator or just do that arithmetic first in your head and then divide by 2, because it's going to give you the wrong answer if you just type it all in like you see it. If you don't believe me, here is how you can do it on a calculator just to show you. So I need to do parentheses if I'm trying to type in the entire thing, like 14 plus 9. I'm sorry, 14 plus a -9, and then I want to divide it by 2. You get the answer 2.5, or if you write it as a fraction, 5/2. But if I just did this, 14 plus -9 divided by 2, notice how the answer is different. It's a 9.5. That's definitely not the correct answer. Okay, so make sure you're either using parentheses, or you could say, I'm going to find the answer first for 14 plus -9 and then divide this by 2. That's fine too. So 5/2 is our first x coordinate. And then the next one, I don't even need a calculator. 7 plus 1 is 8, divided by 2 is just going to be 4. And you just found your midpoint. Since there was no label for the midpoint, you don't have to put a coordinate here, but if you want to, you can put like the letter M. It is up to you. It is a little confusing here because this is a capital M. So make sure, again, you either pick something this is like a lowercase, but I'm going to actually just cross it off because I don't want to confuse you guys with what is it that we're looking for. So this is the actual midpoint. We use the formula. Now, good question usually students have is, do I have to show all my work? No, you don't have to show all your work, but you do have to show the setup, because if you just have an answer with a coordinate, I have no idea where it came from or how to give you any partial credit if you do it incorrectly. Okay, and then the next one that I wanted to go over is number 4, because there is a question like that on the test and eventually probably on the quiz as well. These other ones you can definitely try out for more practice. There's some with square roots, fractions. I know that makes it a little bit trickier, but definitely give it a try first and then check your answers, and we can go over this tomorrow as well. Same thing for the midpoint question with these letters. I know that looks more complicated, but you can always try it, and then we'll go over those answers. Number 4 says, and read it carefully because there will be a question like this and you want to make sure to read carefully. It says, given the endpoint 2,8 and the midpoint is 4,6, what's the other endpoint? This time they don't give us both endpoints and ask you to find a midpoint. They're telling us that one of the endpoints is 2,8, and I'm not even graphing it properly. I'm just kind of doing a random sketch. And the other endpoint would be like, or we don't know where the other endpoint is, but we know this is the midpoint at 4,6. So imagine if it was like this. We don't know what this endpoint is. So you know this endpoint, you know the midpoint, you don't know this point. So here's a couple of different ways that you can solve this. The easiest is actually with a table. So if you make a table here of like your x and y coordinates, and you first put whatever endpoint you know about, which is 2,8, and then you put your midpoint, which is 4,6. Depending on the pattern that you use to get between these 2 points, you just extend that pattern to get your next point, and this will be your answer for the endpoint that's missing. So from 8 to 6, I'm subtracting 2. So I'll subtract 2 again and get 4. From 2 to 4, I'm adding 2. And then if I add 2 again, just to keep this pattern going, I would get 6. So 6 and 4, that is my endpoint that I want to write down about. Okay, so my final answer here for the other endpoint would be 6, 4. And you don't have to label it with a letter. Again, I wrote the word endpoint just because I want to make sure it's clear. What did you just find? You did not find a midpoint. We already knew that. We just found the other endpoint. Now, there is a way to do this algebraically. It is a lot more work, so I'm not going to show it here. But if you feel like this method doesn't work well for you and you'd like a second one, I can show you that at a later time too. Definitely, though, this is the quickest and easiest if you, consider just making a table out of the values. Okay, and then if you want to try number 5 out for some more practice also, feel free to do that. All right, so tomorrow will be a practice day on the 3 things that we've kind of been doing all week: slope, distance, and midpoint formula. So bring this packet tomorrow too, and we can go over 6.4 or 6.3, any questions, and then 6.4, there is the practice that starts on the next page that you'll have some time in class to work on. Okay, so you can start on your 6.3 homework, which is in your same homework packet.